Maps are simply answers to questions. And so, historically, maps have been produced in different abstractions to answer specific questions. So, I don't know, a tube map is the answer to many questions. How do I get to A to B using a particular transport network? And
hello and welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. Today I'm talking to Misha, and Misha is the co-founder of FatMap, and he's building a platform and a community based around mapping the outdoors. I really hope you enjoy the interview. Misha, I really want to thank you for taking the time to do this interview with me. And the reason I reached out to you is because you're doing something really interesting with mapping. Now, to the untrained eye, it looks like you've built the Google Street View for the outdoors, for mountain sports. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Where it all began was sitting in a tent, probably nearly 10 years ago, in the mountains in Turkey, in the middle of a storm that went on for actually nearly 7 days. And in that time, my co-founder Dave and I had a lot to talk about. One of the things we got talking about was how mapping has just kind of completely changed in our urban lives. We've got kind of globalized platforms that kind of dynamic, contextual, real time for every decision in our urban lives. And in an outdoor context, that nothing had really involved. We still kind of had many different places to piece together information. And this was really that's from that spark, like following that insight and trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty understandable too. Like more and more people are being concentrated in urban environments. So where more people are, there's more data being collected, there's more interest and more focus, and probably more people willing to sort of throw resources, throw money after those areas and sort of like make dedicated apps towards them or improve the mapping data, the mapping systems we have that support those areas. So I completely understand that. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot of people using the outdoors, so why not make something for them?
Yeah, we think, actually there's more and more people placing a bigger and bigger importance on spending time outdoors. One of the other insights we had was that the pastime of going outdoors used to be something that only was done by hardcore enthusiasts. But really, I think now more and more people are looking for these experiences, and they're becoming much mainstream. And the tools haven't evolved to help make that easier and safer for people. So that's really what FatMap's all about.
Now, when I log on to FatMaps or come to the website, I see a lot of different things. And it feels very much like a platform. It feels like, well, I can make a profile, I can create guidebooks, and I can share my adventures. And then I also have a section where I just come into a map and I can zoom into different areas in the world. And I come from New Zealand, so I zoomed into Mount Cook, which is the highest mountain in New Zealand. And immediately I could see trails that other people have walked, things that they've skied down, climbing routes. And I can click on that and sort of see what they've done. And then I can add a whole bunch of extra information. I can add weather information and snowpack conditions. And there's also a lot of terrain information available there. It feels like a GIS for the outdoors.
Yeah, I guess in many ways that's what it is from a technology perspective. I didn't really start my life in mapping, but really saw a problem that needed to be solved from a user perspective, that just was very hard to get the right information and to make better decisions when going outdoors. And fundamentally, like our wider ambition is to build the single destination that anyone can go to when they want to spend time outdoors, whether that's to discover new places to go or their next adventure they want to go on. To plan like in detail, to kind of navigate when you're on the trail and make decisions, and then also to kind of relive and tell your story. And so really building a whole community of people who make it easier and safer to go outdoors and enjoy nature.
And I think that social aspect is really, really important, definitely. And the idea of creating a community around that, like, yeah, very good idea and a very important aspect if you're going to spread this idea and get it to grow and get it to develop. But I think the people that are listening to this podcast, they'll be particularly interested in like the data that you use. Where does this data come from?
Yeah, so I mean, the tools that you were talking about there, like essentially what we did was we started building out like a model of like the non-urban world, and so that was elevation data, so the height of the land, imagery in different seasons, summer and winter, depending on what sport you're doing, whether you're a skier or a hiker or a biker or whatever. Also reference data, so understanding where, instead of like streets and businesses, like we focus on summits and rivers and valleys and the like, and so and trails, and bringing those all together. But on top of that, I think the GIS element, the kind of you're talking about, is we turned the whole thing into like what I call a computational map. So we can change the abstraction that you're looking at based on what you're trying to solve. So if you want to see how steep something is, you can turn the whole map into a steepness heat map. If you want to see like the orientation to maybe particularly stick to south-facing slopes, if you're a skier or whatever it might be, you can do that. So we've got a whole bunch of tools that allow you to essentially query the terrain and all of this underlying data to get the kind of precise and reliable and accurate information you need for adventure. And now we've started to go a little bit further with that, and rather than just providing a model of the world, we're starting to integrate real-time data. So things like snow cover, precipitation, forecasts, and avalanche risk for skiers, and much, much more that you can overlay into the map.
So a lot of people that are working in the geospatial industry will understand how those sort of calculations take place. You know, how you show elevation in a heat map, for example, and they'll probably have a good understanding of the tools that are involved, and they'll have that sort of classical understanding of, okay, in other GIS systems, in other geographical information systems, the icon looks like this, and I do this, and then I do this, and how things work. But your audience is quite different. So on one hand, you've got that you're making a technical tool, but you have to make it in a way that people will understand how to use it. And these people aren't necessarily trained in how geographical information systems work. There must have been a few sort of problems around that, I could imagine, in making a tool that people that's intuitive for people.
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge. You know, one of the challenges with like a platform like ours, because it's solving many different problems in many different contexts, is to keep it simple, I think, and that's been one of the hardest things to do. I suppose the way we think about mapping is, maps are simply answers to questions. And so, you know, historically, maps have been produced in different abstractions to answer specific questions. So, you know, I don't know, a tube map is the answer to many questions. How do I get to A to B using a particular transport network? And of course, like we're building an outdoor map, and typically, like, you would have had one abstraction in a classic topographic map to solve many problems. So it was an elevation map, it had a distance grid, and it had lots of different reference data. And like there was an art and a challenge to providing the right amount of detail, but not too much detail, so it was easily readable. So we approached it slightly differently, was to say, because of what we can do with digital data, we can actually show the perfect map that is the perfect answer to any particular question. So rather than, I guess, asking our users to have a particular technical skill to use a tool, we focused like the interface on solving the problem that we know people have in the outdoors. So, for example, skiers care a lot about for example, in the backcountry, avalanche risk is an important thing, and that happens on various different. The gradient is one of the most kind of important factors, and so we built a tool that used an avalanche risk model to overlay it onto the terrain. There's lots of GIS stuff going on in the background in terms of the terrain analysis, but from a user's perspective, all they're seeing is a level of risk shown on the terrain to make a kind of real life decision with.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and definitely not an easy problem to solve, because you're hiding everything that's going on in the background from the user and just giving them the answer to the question.
Yeah, and you know, more and more we're starting to build more and more tools now. The community is really coming to life and starting to request things for all sorts of different activities. You know, one of the things we found is that you know, actually what what was useful for skiers actually was also useful for people doing base jumping and wingsuiting, and so we seem to have kind of uncovered a whole bunch of ways we can help people from all sorts of activities.
I was just thinking there. So people are coming into your platform and they're using it as a reference. Like, what is the avalanche risk, for example, for this particular area on this particular day? Does that translate into some sort of responsibility for you then, as the company, as the people providing that risk overview?
Yeah, I mean, we take obviously our responsibility is very seriously, but one of the core beliefs is that actually going outdoors, and one of the enjoyable things about going outdoors is actually taking responsibility for ourselves. So, we think a lot about trying to make it easier and safer for people to go outdoors, but simply from a platform perspective, all we're doing is giving people information in order for hopefully them to make better decisions of their own. So we'll never tell you if it's safe or dangerous, but we'll tell you perhaps some information that helps you understand the risk better for you to make your own decision.
Yeah, and I think probably that's the only logical approach to this kind of thing. One of the interesting things I saw on your map was so on the side you have a few different panels where you can choose different layers to add, and there was one called custom layers. Does that mean I can upload my own data to it?
No, so this is a way you can kind of query the terrain. So it's almost like a query. Yeah, it's a query tool for the terrain. So you might say, okay, I'm looking for terrain that's no steeper than this on this particular aspect or elevation, and it will actually help you find that kind of terrain. So it was originally built for skiers to find good snow or avoid risk, but now we're finding all sorts of applications from ATV drivers using it to find terrain where vehicles are capable of going on, and so it's really a tool that you can use to find the terrain that suits your sport or activity.
I just want to go back to what you said before. You talked a little bit about real-time data. So I'm assuming one example real-time data that I could see would be very useful for this and is already integrated in the system would be weather data. Do you have any other examples of real-time data that you use in the system?
So one of the things we built was, for example, real-time snow cover. So it currently covers in Europe and North America. So you can see in real time what the snow line is, and it's daily updated. You can also see what the forward-looking 3-day forecast is for new precipitation and the layer at which that turns to snow, for example. We're starting to also do integration with actual reference data objects. So, for example, you have often lifts within a particular resort, so cable cars, etc., and we show them on the map, but we're also integrating them with live data feeds, so you'll be able to see if they're running or not, for example.
Like obviously with lift data, that's something that you don't generate yourself, but something like snow cover, for example, do you have a model running in the background that's constantly updating snow cover on over these big geographic areas, or is this data that you're taking from somewhere else that you're integrating into the system?
Yeah, in many cases, we're typically aggregating data from many different places. We think of maps are only as good as they are accurate, and so one of the things we've tried to do is always use the best data sources. So we used to care a lot about how the resolution of terrain data, but the same applies to the live data. We go and aggregate the best providers of the data in different local locations and actually produce a single global map for that. And that's true of all our data sets.
And I think that's very typical of people looking to do work in the web mapping space, because I mean, firstly, there's a huge data volumes that they'd have to save and update and maintain themselves. So it's much easier to integrate. But then very quickly you run into a problem. Okay, well, if this third-party data source, if that has an error or if that is unavailable or the server is down, then it's my system that looks broken to the user. Is this something that you've run into before?
Yeah, and I guess we've built the platform around that with lots of kind of redundancy in certain areas, and then also essentially the biggest piece of software development we've done is building the underlying platform, and that aggregates thousands and thousands of different data sources of different types, normalizes them all into a single set of standards, then creates like all of the tiling and everything that we need to kind of provide them at all different resolutions, and of course then there's the whole function of time on top of that. So we take care to but where our data sources are coming from, and the quality and the accuracy are super important. That's the interesting thing about particularly outdoor mapping, is that you're typically making decisions at a very local level. And so the maps that we produce, whilst we strive for, or we have global coverage, the user experience is only as good as the information they got at a hyper-local level on the problem they were trying to solve on that day in that moment.
Yeah. I think we've probably talked a little bit about this before, but use cases, obviously for planning a trip into the mountains, I can see that, or a ski trip, but have there been any use cases of FatMap that have really surprised you?
Yeah, I think what we uncovered was, the first product we ever built was like what I call our Tesla Roadster. It was a very niche product for people to find and follow off-piste ski lines and backcountry ski tours. And it was a very local product, but we kind of uncovered that this solved a problem that wasn't really addressed by the existing tools. And then we spent really the last kind of 2 or 3 years building that out into a single global coverage. So taking the value that gave at a local level and building a global map. And as we started to build out more activities, so skiing, hiking, mountain biking, trail running, we started to get more and more requests for more activities. And what we really uncovered was that there were applications of people using it for sea kayaking or even sailing to create and share routes. We've seen applications in people working in kind of wilderness areas and using it actually to share locations because that just didn't exist before. So, in many ways, what we've built is the single global map for everything and everywhere and all activities that happen off-road, off the beaten track.
Obviously, that idea of community is really important, and we've seen over the last 10 years now the explosion of social media. People love to share things, and people are also really passionate about what they do outside, their activities, their hobbies, the adventures that they go on. Are you building a social media for the outdoors?
We're certainly building a community, and we want to build a tool, and in many ways, our most engaged members join essentially a club, which is Explore, which is our premium product with all the real-time data and benefits from kind of partners across the industry. And there is a social component to it, but we don't really think of it first and foremost as a social network.
We haven't talked about it yet, or at least not in any depth, but you also have mobile applications for Apple and Android. Now, a lot of people say that we're moving towards a mobile-first world, and some people even go a step further and say we're moving towards a mobile-only world. And recently I had an experience of this myself, taking a mobile device into the outdoors. I was back in New Zealand and was away on a sort of exploring mountaineering trip in the mountains for 2 weeks. And instead of taking a GPS with us, we had a few paper maps, of course, but we also had a mobile phone. And that phone had an app on it that we bought for about $2, and it had all of the topographical maps for New Zealand on it. It had amazing battery life, and it's simply and a great screen, crystal clear resolution. It did everything that we needed. With these mobile apps that you're building, can you take this data offline? Can I have the same functionality out in the wilderness as what I have on the website?
Yeah, of course. And so that's also so essentially by joining Explore or a kind of club, we say it makes you ready for any adventure, and essentially it enables you to take all of that data offline anywhere in the world. You can choose your location. All of the tools that we talked about, the kind of abstractions, the whole toolkit, the kind of all of those things that the GIS world maybe have been using in terms of data analysis and abstractions in the past, now is therefore in your pocket. and of course all of the real-time data tools as well, so long as, of course, they were updated during your last piece of connectivity. And we're seeing more and more people doing what you described, like mobile phones are becoming, they're essentially pocket computers, and they're becoming very reliable even in extreme environments. There are models that are specifically built for that. The batteries are very, very reliable now. The positioning is very good, and you can obviously now get a whole bunch of stuff, including solar chargers and connectivity devices, to make it a completely reliable and useful tool when you're way off the grid.
Yeah, and I think too, in terms of data collection, you're going to be able to do so much more with a phone app, with an app on your phone, I should say, in the outdoors. I could envision a time where you could save pictures and upload them to your system, for example, with a geotag, where you could have other sensors plugged into your phone. You could be collecting a whole bunch of different information. Maybe you could have streaming, probably in the outdoors it's a bit hard to get connection, but eventually perhaps we could stream directly to your system. And that's all valuable information. That would be real-time updates coming into your system. Could you envision a world or a time where FatMaps could accommodate something like that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially that's very much what we're building. We were building a single platform to bring together all of the information that exists in the outdoors, both actual and real time. We very much see that as a community platform, and we want it to serve the needs of the community. Actually, what you describe about kind of around mobile devices, when we were building the first product, one of the things we did was take it to Southeast Greenland on an expedition to go and climb and ski new routes there. And there was really, the last map of that area had been made in 1954 at a scale of around 1 to 250,000. So, in adventure terms, it was a bit like going to try and, using a road atlas to explore a kind of wilderness. And, when we got there, like what we did was use the platform to kind of pull in the local information that we were learning from the people who live and work there, and the local Greenlandics, and where the kind of huts were and what the safe passage routes were. And we were able to put all of that in to FatMap, and therefore essentially have that when we were off kind of on the adventure. So, the idea is now that people can also share those things with one another. I guess make it easier and safer. And I think there's another important point there, because what that ultimately gave rise to was, well, should we really encourage more people to go to these places, and what's the responsibility there? And so that, when you mention social networks, one of the key differences that we believe is that if you look at how most of the existing social networks work, is they typically reinforce the visibility of content, the more it's accessed. And so you get these kind of positive flywheels where the more a piece of content gets viewed, the more views it's encouraged to have. And we're actually starting to see a lot of problems in the outdoors where basically a small number of places are actually becoming overrun as the popularity increases, but the tools and the platforms and the information available for people to discover these places is still very limited. And so we're building our whole architecture and our whole data architecture in a very specific way that allows people to share privately rather than just publicly, but also understand the impact we're having on working with local organizations to limit the visibility of certain things and try to spread people out across more places rather than concentrate everyone into just the most popular places. And our hope is that by encouraging more people to go and spend time and essentially increase the economic value of like wild places across the world in a sustainable way, we can actually help contribute to their protection, rather than just using them for our enjoyment.
I think that's a really interesting approach. I love the idea that you talked about that flywheel there. You're reinforcing that if it gets lots of shares and likes, that they'll show it to more people on social media. And what you're talking about is more of a sort of push-pull. You're going to encourage people to get out there by giving them these great tools and showing them more things and making it easier for them. But at the same time, you're going to have something built into the system where you're going to try and distribute these people out to different areas, and working with local councils. I think that's brilliant. That's a really really interesting approach to things.
Yeah, we think it's a win-win because ultimately no one wants to stand in a queue with 1,000 other people just to go and see a viewpoint. Like, I think most people enjoy the outdoors because it's wild, and they can disconnect from perhaps like the busyness of their daily lives. And so we like that it kind of should improve the experience for people whilst also helping to protect those natural landscapes. And also there's an element that the outdoor economy is growing very fast. More and more people want to access it, and we want to enable those local economies. We want to enable the businesses, the local guides, to find their customers. There's no platform out there today that allows them to do that properly.
Yeah. Not that I've seen anyway. Hey, I just have a few more questions before let you go. And one of them is, what has been the most difficult thing about building FatMap?
That's a good question. I suppose there's many different problems we had to solve, from finding data to building rendering engines to learning how to deal with like massive quantities of data or data in different standards, or understanding what features certain users wanted to need to building a business model. And the single hardest thing was actually synthesizing all of those many moving parts, particularly in such a way that there's a lot of uncertainty in all of them. And so sometimes, or whether rather than sometimes, I say almost always, things don't move quite as fast as you want them to. Like, it might take a long time to get access to a certain piece of data, or the development on a certain thing might take longer than you want. And the trick is actually making sure that just being an issue in one part of the chain doesn't actually create too big a knock-on effect. And particularly when thinking about like the financial resources we had to build, we were trying to solve so many problems at once. It was very possible that just like one thing would then slow down the whole chain. But then we obviously had timelines to keep to particularly with regards to our financial resources. So yeah, solving all of the uncertainty in the many moving parts has been the biggest challenge, and probably remains the biggest challenge.
So one of the reasons you started FatMap, that was because there was no platform in this space before. No one was solving these problems in an outdoor setting. But in the urban environment, in the built environment, we have Google Maps, and we've got a number of other big players solving these problems. Can you guys look over and see what they're doing and sort of translate that the new functionality they're coming with, for example, and translate that one-to-one in the outdoor environment? Would that make sense? Is there any sort of inspiration you can get from them, or are we talking about completely different communities that we're trying to serve?
You can draw some parallels. So, for example, of course, Google will have traffic information and transport information as real-time data. We have things like snow cover, whether the lifts are running, weather data, etc. So there are parallels. We can learn a lot from those platforms in some of the ways that they handle geodata, and we have done. I think maps tend to be very specific. So, they tend to be about solving a particular problem. And so we spend most of our time looking at how we solve problems for people. I think one of the other challenges actually that's kind of interesting that we had to overcome was around access to data and the cost of it. Typically geographical data is very expensive and has been consumed is consumed by people or bought by people in very localized contexts. So particularly, you touched on the world of GIS previously, and people would typically buy very good data for a very small area in order to do some processing. So we did that when we built our first product for a handful of resorts in Europe. But then when we wanted global coverage, we had a real challenge in that we wanted that very high quality data that was super, super accurate at a local level, but we wanted it for the whole world. And the cost of that was just not not something that a small company could afford. I think a lot of the existing major global platforms by Google, Apple here, and Bing as well, they had resources because they were building into these huge consumer markets, and there were big technology companies that had other forms of monetization that were driving them. So we had to think about how could we get data that was super accurate, very high resolution for the whole world, without needing to spend essentially between $300 and $500 million. And the way we ended up doing that was talking to some of these guys and taking a leaf out of Spotify's book. So one of the parallels we drew was what Spotify did for the music industry, which is to say put all of the content into the platform and build a royalty model where effectively the rights owners get a share of the revenue based on how much the data is used, how many plays a song gets. We built exactly the same thing for the geospatial industry. So we have many providers now, from Digital Globe, Intermap, and they're the people that we really built the model with, and they put all of their global data into our platform, and based on how utilized it is and how much of their data users access, we share royalties back from a business model with them.
That seems like a very clever approach. The idea of having to cough up $500 million right at the start of a project seems a little bit overwhelming. Hey, but while we're talking about data, we talked a little bit before about user-generated content. So the people are uploading tracks, and we talked a little bit about they've got these mobile devices with them in the field now, in the outdoors. So the future of recording, or the possibilities for recording more data, it's going to increase with time and with technology. Could you imagine a time where FatMap can use that user-generated content as data, as different layers in the system? I'm thinking specifically about, okay, under these weather conditions on this route, it takes this much time to reach the top. Is that something that could be integrated into the system at some stage?
Yeah, I think completely. And I think when you start to think about these things, in many ways, the sky's the limit. And essentially what we're doing from a content perspective is building the information graph for the non-outdoor world. So that's combining activity data, so the things you talk about like hiking routes or whatever, with the underlying reference model of the world, but also the information about who does it, when, the real-time data that we had about the world, so what the weather is like, etc., and then how long it took when they did it, etc. And so, with the advances that the world is having in machine learning across all industries, we can use those advantages and leverage them to essentially give more insight, make adventures easier and safer from the knowledge that's inherently in that data.
Misha, I really want to thank you for taking the time to do this interview with me today. I really enjoyed hearing about what you're up to. But before we say goodbye, could you tell the listeners where they could go to follow along with FatMap, or maybe even try it for themselves?
Yeah, so it's very simple. You can go to fatmap.com, or you can download the mobile app, and as you say, you can create your account, and you can start discovering, planning, and living adventures. And so, yeah, we hope to see you on that.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It was really a pleasure.
And that's it for another episode of the Mapscaping Podcast. My name is Daniel, and today I'd just like to apologize for that little bit of crackling towards the end of the interview. It was something in the audio that I just couldn't get rid of. So sorry about that. But I'll be back next week with a new episode. Please tune in then. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me on social media. And if you have a friend that you think might enjoy these episodes, please share it with them. I'd really appreciate it. Talk to you next week. Bye.